Welcome back to our cabinet build for my drill press. This is part two. On part one, you saw that I finished the box, which is right here. Everything is assembled, glued up. I installed the countertop, I installed the wheels, and everything is finished. So now it's time to install the drawers. Like I've done in many of my prior build projects, I select these drawer slides, these heavy-duty, soft close drawer slides. They can carry about 100 pounds per drawer, and they have a very reasonable price point. I buy them by the dozen, and they're about $15 for a pair of them for one drawer. So that is, I think, very affordable, and I like them. Let's talk a little about the drawer slide length. I selected 22-inch length for this project. That's because I designed the cabinet depth to be 23 inches on the outside dimension, and knowing that I've inlaid the back panel, full 3/4 inch back panel for strength, as we talked about before, I end up with 22 1/4 inch inside dimension, which works out rather nicely with this size slide. Even though they're 22-inch nominal, they actually only measure like 21 and 5/8. So you see I have a little bit over 1/2 inch of clearance there to the back of the cabinet, and that's fine. I mean, I'm going to have that much for adjustability, but I'm going to minimize the amount of dead space I have in the back. To install these slides, I found this way to be the easiest for me. Basically, knowing that I know the level of each of my drawers in this project, as we've been talking about, there's going to be three levels of drawers here. And knowing the levels, I can sketch out the dimensions of the drawer boxes, where they'll sit in the cabinet, and then from there I can figure out where the slide height has to be for each of the 3 levels. Knowing those numbers, I go ahead and go in my scrap pile and pull out some pieces that build up to that same number, and I use basically, these spaces at the bottom to do any fine adjustments to get me to the exact number I need. Once that is set up, then I basically put the slide like this. I open the slide and I go ahead and mark out the screw holes, drill them and screw them to the cabinet, and I move on to the next drawer. And as I go down to the next level of drawer height, then I can remove one of these panels and I get the next level. One other consideration you have to have when installing the slides is how far back to set it. So the manufacturer recommends a 1/16 of an inch from the face of the cabinet. So for me, since I did a 1/4 inch round over here, I'm just going to set the face of the slide to the edge of the inside edge of the round over, and that's close enough. Now with the drawer slides installed, we're now going to start building the drawer boxes themselves. So we go back to our drawing right here, we see we have 2 banks of drawers, one large bank, 12 1/4 inches wide on the inside, and a smaller width bank, 5 1/2 on the right side. So, and there's 3 levels to them. So, and if you see the different sizes of the drawer sides, you see that they progressively get smaller as you go up. To the bottom is a 7 1/2 inch drawer height. the next one's 6.5, and the next one's 5.5. As I've done usually in my other cabinets, what I like to do is not make the drawer side or the drawer box as high as the full front of the drawer, the drawer face. I like to keep it down lower so I get better access to each drawer when they're open. So I decided to reduce all the heights of the drawer sides themselves to 5.5 inches, which simplifies the cutting of the drawer sides and the fabrication. So I've done the calculations here, and it turns out that I need about 33 feet of a 5.5 inch tall drawer sides material. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my lumber rack and pull out some 1/2 inch plywood. It's going to be pine faced, sanded, and start to rip boards down. Now all the draw sides cut for the draw box, we're now going to set up the router bit on my router table, the draw lock bit. And I want to walk you through the setup of this now. If I didn't have templates, and I don't seem to have a template for this size 1/2 inch wood here, I'm using for the draw box, 1/2 inch pine and maple faced plywood. So what I've done is I measured the thickness here of the plywood, and it comes out to about 48.48 inches, as you can see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically divide that in half, which is going to be 242, right about there. That's good. So we're going to lock this in place. So knowing the thickness of the material, I measured the thickness, as you saw, and now what I've done is I've set the height of the router bit, as you see here, right here, to really center on this center band of ply within this router, which is exactly in the center of this plywood. So as long as I get that bit right there, this cutting edge centered into the center ply, then I know I'm just about at the right place. To set the fence depth, I now basically take my calipers like I showed you earlier, and I set it so that it is exactly half of the thickness of the board. And so what I do is I move the fence until the gap, as you see, between the depth gauge of my caliper and the edge of the wood is even on both sides, and that gives me 0.24 depth into the material, which is going to center the fence cut into the material. So we're going to go ahead and do a test cut and see how it looks. So here's the joint. It didn't cut deep enough, as you can see. It's not really deeper in the wood because the joint is not fully, it doesn't come to the edge of the pieces. So I think the center line is good because, as you can see, I have it right in the center of the ply, like we talked about. But the depth of the cut now needs to be adjusted so we can get this joint to close together better. So we're going to run one more pass and set the depth of the fence a little deeper. Okay, so after a couple of adjustments, you can see that I got the joint pretty good. It's even on all sides, and the surfaces are coming to flush with each other, and we got a good depth into the joint. So I think it's a good joint to go with. And now we're going to go ahead and router all the draw boxes. I wanted to show you the joint itself and what you have to do to account for the dimension, like we talked about in my other videos. Because this is a draw lock joint, there is a material that ends up to be outside of the joint, like you see here. This is about 1/8 of an inch thickness, and it gives me a really nice joint, as you can see. And unlike the locked miter, which meets both edges of the box meet exactly at the outside edges, this one doesn't. So I have to account for this extra 1/8 inch material that is now going to be added to the side of the drawer, which overall I wanted to be 22 inches in length. So what I did was I had to cut back all the draw sides, sorry, a 1/4 of an inch because I'm counting for 1/8 at each end of additional material. So instead of cutting these draw sides 22 inches exactly, I cut them 21 3/4, and that would give me the 22-inch overall dimension. So as you've been talking about before, we want to make sure that the lock, the draw lock joint, is in the correct direction. So this is going to be the long side of the drawer that will pull the drawer back and forth as we open and close it, and this is going to be the front and back pieces here. So I've organized these in that way. So this stack here are all the long side of the drawers that pull in and out, and then here are the front and backs. These pieces will be done on the fence, against the fence of the router table, and these cuts over here will be done on the table, pressing the pieces against the table as we run them through the router bit. So now with all the pieces routed, it's now time to clean up the edges with a little sandpaper. Here are a couple of boxes dry fitted together. Now that we've done all the joinery in the ends and cut them to size. So now the next step is I'm going to go ahead and cut the panels for these boxes before I run the dado through the bottom edge of the drawer sides. And typically the drawer bottom panel is the dimension of the drawer minus 1/2 inch because you can allow a 1/4 inch penetration into each side, front and back. So in this case, I'm going to deduct 9/16, an extra 1/16 of an inch, just to allow for a little bit extra room, make sure there's no fit-up issues. We're now going to cut the dados into the bottom of the drawer sides for the drawer panel, bottom panel. And here's the material cut up, the drawer bottoms. And as I've done before, I measure the thickness of the plywood. This is maple face plywood. It comes about 2.26 inches, a little over 1/4 inch. So again, I go to my trusty table, and I look up that I need 2 shims, no shims, 2 end blades. Gives me a 1/4 inch, but I really have 0.26, so I'm going to throw in a 1/32 paper shim in the middle of the 2 end cutters, and then that will bring me up to about 0.28. So I've set that up in my saw right here. I put a dado stack with the two dado blades, and just 1 paper shim between them, and it's up about, the height is about 0.27 inches, a little bit more than a 1/4 inch for the depth cut. And I set the fence for a 1/4 inch. So let's run some test pieces and see how they do. Okay, so I ran a test piece and it fits really nice. So we're going to go ahead and run through the drawer sides to put the dados in. So here's half the drawer sides that are all done with the dado into all the bottoms for the drawer panel. And you can see they're just about done, almost ready for final sanding. But I want to draw your attention to this tear out right here. This is really bad. I've not had problems like this in other projects, but I think we have a combination of things going on here. One, My draw lock bit is not that new, so maybe it needs to be sharpened or even replaced. That could be contributing to this. The other issue is this material, this maple face veneer plywood, has a very thin veneer to it. And what compounds it even more is this. I'm cutting now across the grain. This is the end grain, so which has a high tendency to chip out the veneer as opposed to a cut along with the grain. So this might be contributing too. I went across the grain on all the sides, like we talked about, and it just tore this out. So I'm gonna probably do a couple of test cuts on different materials, see if it works, if the problem exists in all materials, and if it doesn't, I'm gonna replace the bit, the draw lock bit. For this project, I'm going to continue to move forward. I'm going to go and fill this with some wood filler and sand it up, so hopefully it will be barely noticeable. I investigated the tear out issue further, and I tried a few things. I tried adjusting the bit speed from 12,000 RPM all the way up to 25,000. Still no difference at all. I tried using tape, a little bit of an improvement, but not much. What worked the best, I found, was adding a sacrificial zero clearance plate like this. Just like for a table saw, I basically took a piece of this old paneling, about 1/8 inch thickness, and I slowly edged it into the bit, and I cut a perfect slot to relieve around the relief of the draw lock bit. And when I did that, I ran the same material through. Here's that maple, the same maple that really tore out. Look at that. Isn't that something? So it's just about perfect. So and that is edge grain. So I really am impressed, and I did find with the pine, the sanded pine faced material, that it was even less susceptible to tear out, but on that it worked just as well. So for both materials, the solution I recommend is to use the zero clearance spacer, sacrificial spacer, and use it when you're cutting end grain. You don't need it for the cutting with the grain, but the end grain is critical. So that's my advice on how to solve that problem. With the draw box sides and bottoms all cut and fabricated, we're going to do a final sanding before we assemble the drawers. So I glued and assembled the drawers, and I also, like I normally do with my projects, I use tack nails, brads, to assemble the corners and make sure I get a nice tight fit. And then in this case, I went ahead and clamped up the drawers because they're very deep. They're very deep in this direction. And these sides, these drawer slides are only 1/2 inch thickness. So I was getting a little bowing from them as I was assembling the drawers. So to counter that effect, I basically, in this project, I use glue in the joints all the way on all 4 panels. And I don't usually do that for smaller drawers, but this called for it. And then I use this clamping system that I came up with to make sure I get a nice straight edge at all the drawer sides and to keep everything nice and square. With the drawer boxes glued up and assembled, it's now time to do the final finishing to them. We're going to fill in these nail holes that you saw, these brad holes that you saw me install. We're going to apply a veneer face, birch veneer tape to the top of the drawers so you don't see the end grain. And then we're going to give them a good overall sanding, final sanding, and then we're going to apply Danish oil to them to seal them. With the drawer boxes all sanded and finished, we're now going to apply a Danish oil to them. And I'm going to apply, what I usually apply is this Waxo Danish oil, natural finish. And I'm going to apply it with just a foam brush. Let it soak in. And then after 15 minutes, rub it in and you get a nice finish, hand rub finish. So it's been about 15 minutes since I applied the coat, and now we're just going to give it a nice hand wipe finish. And you see it came out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. And if you want to see some of that filler I did on the tear out in the corners, if you can see it, it came out really good. See right in here, you can see some of the wood filler. It's very hard to see, but I think I did a pretty good job on filling that tear out. Can't even notice it. So, and there you go. And we just wipe them down, let them sit overnight, and we're ready to install them into the cabinet. With the drawers finished, it's now time to install them into our cabinet. So what I did was, I have a drawer here, one of the drawers, and I looked at the manufacturer's sheet, installation guideline sheet, and it says to install the guide 1 1/4 inch, the guide that goes on the drawer box, 1 1/4 inch up from the bottom of the drawer, and to be flush with the front of the drawer box. So I made a little template here. That's going to make it really easy for me because we have 6 drawers to do, and we're going to have 12 slides to install total. And so I made this nice little jig where just using some hot glue and some scrapped plywood, I can just place it on the bottom of the drawer, and it will give me precisely the location to mount the drawer slide. So we're going to go ahead and just use this jig to do all the drawers. Just mark out the holes, pre-drill, and then screw the slides onto each drawer, and then insert them into the drawer, the cabinet box.